The forest smelled of pine and decay, wet earth clinging to the hem of Hilda's gown as she walked deeper into the shadow of ancient trees. 5 years. 5 years of sleeping beside a man whose touch felt like obligation, whose eyes slid past her at meals, whose denials tasted like ash even as she choked them down. There is no one else, Hilda. Your jealousy dishonors us both. She had believed him once, perhaps twice, but the third time he returned to their chambers smelling of lavender. That cloying, sweet scent his former lover wore like a signature. Something inside her had calcified into certainty. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy in fragments, painting the forest floor in coins of gold. Hilda's ladies had urged her to bring guards, but she had waved them away with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Let Magnus worry when she returned late. Let him feel, for once, the gnawing of uncertainty she carried like a second skin. A sound threaded through the birdsong. Low. Rhythmic. Hilda's feet slowed. The path curved ahead, disappearing behind a massive oak whose roots twisted across the ground like arthritic fingers. She knew this tree. She had played here as a child when her father negotiated trade routes with the former king, the true king, before Magnus's family had seized power in that bloody winter 7 years ago. The sound grew clearer. Breathing. A woman's laugh, breathy and triumphant. Hilda's heart became a drum. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her skirts, willing herself forward around the oak's thick trunk. They didn't see her at first. Magnus had his back to her, his royal cloak discarded carelessly on the moss. His hands gripped the waist of a woman whose auburn hair spilled across the forest floor, whose legs wrapped around him with shameless familiarity. The woman's face was tilted back in ecstasy, her throat exposed, marked with fresh bruises that looked like devotion. Celeste, his first love. The woman he claimed meant nothing anymore. I wondered, Hilda heard herself say, her voice strange and distant. How long you would make me play the fool. Magnus jerked back as though struck. Celeste's eyes snapped open, amber and wild, more wolf than woman even in human form. For a suspended moment, no one moved. The forest held its breath. Hilda? Magnus's voice cracked. He scrambled to stand, to adjust his clothing, his face cycling through shock, guilt, then something harder. Something that looked like resentment at being caught. 5 years. Hilda's laugh scraped her throat raw. 5 years you swore there was nothing. That I was mad, paranoid, unworthy of your trust. She took a step forward, then another, her vision tunneling. Did you laugh about it? About how easily I believed you? You don't understand, Magnus began, but Celeste cut him off. Oh, let her speak. Celeste rose gracefully, gloriously unashamed of her nakedness, of the evidence written across her skin. Let the little political bride have her moment of righteous fury. It's all she has left. The words hit like a slap. Hilda's wolf stirred beneath her skin, wanting blood, wanting justice. But her human heart, gods, her human heart still remembered the boy Magnus had been before power corrupted him, before his father whispered ambitions into his ear like poison. The council will hear of this, Hilda said quietly. Adultery, betrayal of the mate bond. The law is clear, Magnus. Even for a king. Magnus's face drained of color. Behind him, Celeste's expression shifted, amusement melting into something feral and desperate. The scent of fear bloomed sharp and acrid. The law, Celeste hissed, her body already beginning to shift, bones cracking with sickening ease. The law that would see us both executed? I think not. Celeste! No. Magnus reached for her, but she was already moving, already lunging with claws extended and teeth bared. Hilda's wolf surged forward, but too slow, too late. Pain exploded across her face as Celeste's claws raked deep, tearing flesh, nearly taking her eye. She stumbled backward, blood flooding hot and thick down her neck into her mouth. The metallic taste made her gag. Another strike. Claws in her shoulder, shredding muscle. Hilda screamed, trying to shift, trying to defend herself, but Celeste was faster, vicious, attacking with the desperation of the condemned. "Stop! Celeste! Enough!" Magnus's voice seemed far away now, muffled beneath the roaring in Hilda's ears. But Celeste didn't stop. Her teeth found Hilda's throat, tearing, crushing. The world tilted sideways. Hilda hit the ground hard, tasted dirt and pine needles and her own blood pooling beneath her cheek. "She'll tell," Celeste panted above her, still in half shift, her voice distorted. "She'll see us dead, Magnus. Both of us." Through the gathering darkness, Hilda saw Magnus's face, saw the war there, guilt and horror and terrible, selfish fear. She tried to speak, to beg, but only blood bubbled past her lips. "The waterfall," Magnus whispered. "No one will find her there." Strong hands, his hands, hands that had held her during their wedding ceremony, lifted her broken body. The forest blurred past in streaks of green and gold. The sound of rushing water grew louder, deafening, obliterating even her heartbeat. They stood at the boundary, where their packlands ended, and the churning river below marked neutral territory. Hilda's vision flickered. She felt Magnus's grip tighten, then release. The fall was endless. Cold air screamed past her ears. Then water, brutal and freezing, swallowed her whole, dragging her down into darkness that promised oblivion. Above, on the cliff's edge, Magnus watched the river carry away his wife's body and felt nothing but relief. Pain dragged Hilda back to consciousness like hooks in her flesh. Her lungs burned, waterlogged and desperate, expelling river water in violent spasms that tore screams from her shredded throat. Mud pressed against her cheek. Somewhere distant, a crow called out, harsh and mocking. She couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the agony radiating from her throat, her shoulder, her face. The world existed only in fragments. Gray sky, the whisper of reeds, cold seeping into her bones, footsteps, soft against wet earth. Merciful gods. A man's voice, low and shocked. Gentle hands touched her neck, feeling for a pulse she wasn't certain existed. "Stay with me. Just stay." She tried to speak, to warn him that Magnus would kill anyone who helped her, but darkness swallowed the words before they could form. When awareness returned, it came in pieces scattered across time. Warmth first, a fire crackling nearby, furs piled heavy across her broken body. The scent of herbs she didn't recognize, bitter and green. Candlelight dancing across rough wooden beams. And pain, constant and consuming, a living thing that breathed with her. "Drink." That same voice, patient and calm. A cup pressed to her lips, liquid sliding down her ruined throat like molten glass. She choked, whimpered, but he persisted. "I know, but you must." Fever dreams claimed her for what might have been days or weeks. In them, Magnus threw her from the cliff again and again, his face twisting between regret and relief. Celeste's teeth tore at her throat in endless loops. The river dragged her down into depths where drowned things waited with empty eyes. But sometimes, cutting through the nightmares, came that voice. Reading aloud from books in languages she half remembered from childhood lessons, changing cool cloths on her forehead, murmuring reassurances she couldn't quite believe. The first time Hilda truly woke, truly saw, sunlight was streaming through a window carved into stone. She lay in a bed far more comfortable than it had any right to be, in a room that seemed part cave, part cottage. Shelves lined every wall, sagging beneath the weight of leather-bound volumes and strange artifacts. A crown made of what looked like ancient bone. A sword with runes etched along its blade. Maps depicting territories she didn't recognize. "You're awake." Hilda's head turned, slowly, carefully, testing the limits of her healing. The man sat in a chair beside her bed, book open in his lap, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. He was beautiful in a way that seemed wrong for this rough place. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, and eyes the color of winter storm studied her with concern that felt genuine. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, the only imperfection in features that might have belonged to old nobility. He wore simple clothing, but carried himself with a stillness that spoke of deadly capability held in check. Where? Her voice emerged as a rasp, barely human. Her hand flew to her throat, feeling raised scars that hadn't been there before. Easy. He set the book aside, poured water from a clay pitcher. You're safe, deep in the darkwood, far beyond any pack's regular patrols. He helped her sit, supporting her with surprising strength. I'm Aldrich. I found you on the riverbank 3 weeks ago. I wasn't sure you would survive. 3 weeks. The information settled like stones in her stomach. Magnus announced that Hilda was kidnapped during her afternoon walk. Aldrich's expression darkened. He's launched search parties, offered rewards. Plays the devastated husband with remarkable skill, from what my sources tell me. Sources. Hilda's mind worked slowly through the fog of lingering pain and shock. This man lived alone in the depths of the darkwood, yet knew what happened at court. Surrounded himself with artifacts that whispered of lineage and power. Knew ancient healing methods that had saved her from injuries that should have killed her. Who are you? She whispered. Something flickered across his face. Old grief, carefully controlled. Someone who understands what it means to be thrown away by those who should protect you. He handed her the water. Drink, then rest. Questions can wait. But Hilda couldn't rest. Over the following days, as strength returned to her limbs in agonizing increments, she watched him. Aldrich moved through his hidden home with practiced ease, tending a garden that shouldn't thrive in this deep shade, preparing meals with herbs that numbed her pain and accelerated her healing. He read aloud when she couldn't sleep, his voice transforming ancient texts into living stories. "Why do you live out here?" she asked one evening, her throat finally healing enough for longer conversations. "Alone with all these treasures." Aldrich glanced up from the salve he was preparing, his hands stilling. Sometimes isolation is safer than the alternative. Safer for whom? His smile held edges sharp enough to cut. Both myself and those who might otherwise try to kill me. The honesty startled her. Hilda studied the sword mounted above his fireplace, the maps marking territories from before Magnus's father's reign. Understanding bloomed slowly, impossibly. "Your nobility," she breathed. "Banished. Was nobility." Aldrich returned to grinding herbs with steady, rhythmic motions. "Now I'm simply a man who prefers the company of books to liars." Something in his tone resonated through Hilda's chest. Recognition of shared wounds, different shapes, but equal depth. She found herself watching him more carefully after that. The way his shoulders tensed when he mentioned the palace. How his eyes softened when he checked her healing wounds. The inexplicable pull she felt toward this stranger who had saved her life. At the palace, Magnus stood before his council, face arranged in appropriate devastation. "Every resource," he commanded, voice breaking at precisely calculated moments. "Find my wife. Find my Luna." Beside him, carefully hidden in shadows, Celeste smiled. In the darkwood, Hilda took her first steps without support, Aldrich's hand hovering near her elbow. Outside, night settled over the forest like a promise, and something ancient stirred in the darkness between them. Patient, inevitable, waiting to wake. The first snowfall came in late autumn, transforming the darkwood into something from a winter tale. Hilda stood at the window of Aldrich's hidden home, watching flakes drift through the canopy, and realized she could no longer remember the exact shade of Magnus's eyes. "Careful," Aldrich murmured behind her, his presence a warmth she had grown to anticipate. The stone gets cold. She turned to find him holding out a thick wool shawl, concern etched in the lines around his mouth. 3 months had passed since he pulled her broken body from the riverbank, and somewhere in the quiet accumulation of days, her fear had transformed into something far more dangerous. "I'm not fragile anymore," she said, but accepted the shawl anyway, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent heat racing up her arm, a sensation that had been growing stronger, more insistent, with each passing week. Aldrich's breath caught. She heard it, saw his pupils dilate slightly before he stepped back, putting careful distance between them. "No," he agreed quietly. "You're not." They had fallen into rhythms that felt more natural than anything in her 5 years of marriage. Mornings, Aldrich would return from checking his snares, though she noticed he always seemed to know where game would be before he found it, as if the forest whispered its secrets. She would prepare breakfast from his stores, herbs and dried meat and bread she had learned to bake in his stone oven. They ate together, conversation flowing easily now, covering everything from philosophy to pack law, to the scandals of courts that no longer existed. "Tell me about the old ways," Hilda said one afternoon as they walked through snow-heavy woods. Her legs had regained their strength, and she craved these expeditions into the wild. The true mate bonds, before political alliances corrupted everything. Aldrich was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, they were sacred, undeniable. When two souls recognized each other, the bond formed like breathing. Natural, essential, impossible to fake. His voice carried a weight that made her chest tighten. "My parents had such a bond. I watched my father know the moment my mother's heart stopped. Saw him follow her into death within hours. I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate. She stopped walking, touched his arm. "That must have been..." "It was everything," Aldrich interrupted softly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that stole her breath. To love like that. To be so intertwined that losing them meant losing yourself. He covered her hand with his touch deliberate now. "Some would call it weakness. I call it the only thing worth living for." The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken recognition. A deer emerged from the trees, massive and unafraid, and approached Aldrich directly. He reached out, let it nuzzle his palm, his expression distant. "They know you," Hilda whispered, wonder threading through her voice. "All of them. The wolves that watch us sometimes, the ravens, now this." "How?" Aldrich's jaw tightened. "Ancient bloodlines carry certain gifts. The forest remembers loyalty, even when courts forget." He looked at her then, vulnerability cracking through his usual control. "Do you never wonder why I live out here? Really?" "Every day." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Just as I wonder why your home holds artifacts from the old royal line. Why your knowledge of court politics is too detailed for a simple exile. Why you move like a king playing at being a hermit." His hand slid from the deer to cup her face, his thumb tracing the scars Celeste had left. "You see too much." "Not enough." Hilda leaned into his touch, something primal and right singing through her blood. "But I want to." The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable, his mouth finding hers with a hunger that matched her own. The bond between them flared bright and unmistakable, a golden thread weaving itself through her chest, binding her to him with a certainty that terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. This was nothing like the hollow vows she had spoken to Magnus. This was recognition, soul deep and absolute. "Hilda." Aldrich pulled back, breathing hard, his forehead pressed to hers. "You should know what you're binding yourself to, who I really am. Tell me later." She kissed him again and felt him surrender, felt the careful control he maintained fracture beneath the weight of their connection. Around them, The forest seemed to hum with approval, snow falling softer, reverent. At the palace, Magnus stood before Hilda's family with an expression of noble suffering. Her father's face had aged 10 years and 3 months, her mother's eyes perpetually red from weeping. "We continue searching," Magnus assured them, his hand raised in oath. "Every day, every resource. I will not abandon hope." Behind the council chamber's heavy doors, Celeste waited in silk gowns that had once belonged to Hilda, her presence in the palace now constant and unremarked upon. She had learned to play the devoted companion, the comfort in Magnus's grief. Some council members whispered, but none dared speak openly. "How much longer?" she asked when Magnus emerged, her fingers trailing down his chest possessively. "Soon." Magnus caught her hand, brought it to his lips. "Let them adjust to seeing you here. Let the search continue long enough that presuming her death seems merciful rather than suspicious." His smile held calculation. "By spring, you'll be Luna in truth." In the dark wood, Aldrich woke before dawn to find Hilda watching him in the firelight, her expression soft with something that looked dangerously like love. "I never knew it could feel like this," she whispered, her hand over his heart, feeling it beat in rhythm with her own. "Neither did I." He pulled her closer, the mate bond between them strengthening with each shared breath. Outside, wolves howled in acknowledgement, and somewhere deep in Aldrich's blood, something ancient and powerful stirred, responding to the call of its true mate. The morning Aldrich told her everything. Frost painted the windows in patterns that looked like crowns. Hilda woke to find him sitting at the edge of their bed, his back rigid with tension, staring at the sword mounted above the fireplace, the one with runes that seemed to shimmer in certain light. She touched his shoulder, felt the muscle jump beneath her fingers. "I need to tell you who I am," he said quietly, "before this goes further. Before the bond completes and you're tied to me without knowing the full truth." Her stomach tightened. "Aldrich, that sword belonged to my father." He stood, crossed to it with reverent steps. "King Aldrich the Just, murdered in his sleep 7 years ago by Magnus's father and his conspirators." His finger traced the runes without touching the blade. "I watched them burn his body before dawn. Claim he died of sudden illness. I was 19. The rightful heir." The words settled like stones. Hilda's mind raced, connecting fragments she had deliberately avoided assembling. "The prince who disappeared. Everyone said you fled like a coward. They said my wolf was wrong. Unnatural." Aldrich's laugh carried bitterness sharp enough to cut. "My bloodline traces back to the first shifters. Ancient, powerful, different. When I shifted the night they killed my father, tried to defend him. My wolf was larger than anything they'd seen. Silver-white instead of brown or gray. They called it monstrous, claimed it proved I wasn't fit to rule." He turned to face her, and she saw the weight of 7 years etched in his features. 3 council members tried to protect me, demanded proper investigation, challenged the conspirators. They were banished alongside me, scattered to different territories. I've kept them alive, kept us connected, waiting for the moment we could reclaim what was stolen. Why wait? Hilda stood, her heart pounding. If you're the rightful king... Because my wolf was dormant. Aldrich moved to her, his hands framing her face with desperate gentleness. The ancient bloodlines require a true mate bond to fully awaken. Without it, I was strong, but not strong enough to challenge Magnus's forces. I've been waiting 7 years to find you. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications. You knew? When you found me? I suspected. His thumb brushed her cheek. The bond began forming the moment I touched you on that riverbank. But I couldn't tell you, couldn't burden you with this while you were healing, while you were still bound legally to Magnus. His voice dropped to a whisper. I was selfish. I wanted you to choose me for who I am, not what I could offer you. Hilda's breath came short. The bond between them pulsed, insistent, demanding completion. "Show me. Your wolf." Aldrich's eyes widened. "Hilda, it's not. Show me." He stepped back, began stripping away his clothes with hands that trembled slightly. The shift, when it came, was unlike anything she had witnessed. His bones reformed with sounds like thunder, muscles expanding, fur erupting silver-white and luminous. The wolf that emerged towered over her, easily twice the size of a normal alpha, with eyes that burned like winter stars. Power radiated from him in waves that made her wolf cower and submit in reverence. This wasn't just strength. This was ancient authority, the kind that predated councils and corruption, that spoke of a time when shifters were gods walking among mortals. Hilda dropped to her knees, not from fear, but from overwhelming recognition. "You're magnificent." The great wolf lowered its head, nuzzled her gently. She felt the bond snap fully into place, golden and unbreakable, flooding her with his emotions, love and longing and terrible hope. When he shifted back, she was already reaching for him. "Together," she breathed against his mouth. "We take it back together." The weeks that followed transformed into preparation. Aldrich taught her things Magnus had deliberately kept from her, ancient pack laws that gave Lunas equal authority with alphas, combat techniques designed for smaller fighters to defeat larger opponents, the true history of their people before politics corrupted everything. Magnus's father rewrote the laws, Aldrich explained one evening. Maps spread across his table showing territorial boundaries and ally positions. Removed passages about true mate bonds being required for legitimate rule. Made the position hereditary instead of earned. Hilda traced routes on the map, her mind sharp with purpose. "My family still grieves for me. If they knew the truth, they'll be the first we tell." Aldrich covered her hand with his. "But we need the banished council members first. Witnesses to my father's murder, holders of the original laws." He produced a small mirror, its surface cloudy with age. "I can reach them through this. Ancient magic. Bloodbound." She watched him speak into the mirror, saw shadowed faces appear and disappear, heard whispered plans forming. 3 council members scattered across territories, all waiting for this moment, all ready to return. "Magnus is planning something," one of them warned, an older woman with scars across her face. "Whispers suggest a mating ceremony, spring equinox." Aldrich's expression went cold and predatory. "Perfect. Let him gather everyone in one place. Let him believe he's won." His arm slid around Hilda's waist, pulled her against him possessively. "We'll teach him what true power looks like." Outside, snow melted into early spring, and in the palace, Magnus smiled at Celeste across a table laden with wedding plans, completely unaware that his dead wife was sharpening her claws in the darkness, learning to fight like a queen. The throne room had changed in the months since Hilda's disappearance. Where tapestries depicting the old royal line once hung, now only bare stone remained, scrubbed clean of history. Magnus sat slouched in the high seat, one leg draped over the armrest, watching a lesser wolf grovel before him, with eyes that held nothing but contempt. "You question my judgment." Magnus's voice carried the lazy threat of a predator toying with prey. "No, Alpha King. I only thought—" The wolf's voice cracked. He was young, barely past his first shift, trembling so hard his teeth chattered. Thinking. Magnus rose slowly, descended the dais steps with deliberate menace. "That's your mistake. I do the thinking here." His hand shot out, grabbed the young wolf by the throat, lifted him until his feet kicked air. "I am your king, your alpha, your god in this territory. Do you understand?" The boy managed a strangled noise that might have been agreement. Magnus held him there a moment longer, watching his face turn purple before dropping him in a gasping heap. "Get out." The boy fled. In the shadows behind the throne, Magnus's father, old Gregor, smiled with satisfaction that never reached his calculating eyes. Beside him, draped in emerald silk that had once belonged to Hilda, Celeste examined her nails with studied boredom. "Was that necessary?" she asked, though her tone suggested she'd enjoyed the display. Magnus turned to her, his expression softening into something that resembled affection. "They need reminding, especially now." He climbed the steps, pulled her into his lap despite the assembled council members pretending not to watch. "Especially before we make this official." Murmurs rippled through the council chamber. An older member, Lord Brennan, who had served under the true king, cleared his throat with obvious reluctance. "Your Majesty, with respect, the law requires a full year of mourning before..." "Before what?" Magnus's voice went dangerously quiet. "Before I can find comfort? Before I can lead properly? My wife is dead, Brennan. Thrown from a cliff by whoever kidnapped her, her body lost to the river." His grief was a perfectly crafted performance. "I have mourned. I have searched. Now I must think of my pack, of stability, of the future." "But Luna Hilda's family," another council member ventured, "has been informed." Gregor stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of his position as chief advisor. "They understand their daughter is gone. They support the king moving forward, finding new alliance through proper union." Lies. Hilda's family had been told nothing, kept at arm's length with promises of ongoing searches while Magnus consolidated power. Lord Brennan's jaw tightened, but he bowed his head in forced acquiescence. "The spring equinox," Magnus announced, his hand possessive on Celeste's waist. "We will hold the mating ceremony then. All pack members are required to attend, witness the binding, swear allegiance to your new Luna." His eyes swept the room, daring dissent. "Any objections?" Silence answered him. The kind of silence built on fear, on knowing that questioning authority meant disappearing in the night, meant family members found guilty by association. "Good." Magnus dismissed them with a wave. "Prepare accordingly. This will be a celebration our pack remembers for generations." As the council filed out, Lord Brennan paused at the threshold, his shoulders rigid with suppressed rage. Outside, in the courtyard, he found two other older council members, allies from before the coup, survivors who had learned to swallow their honor. "This is madness," Brennan whispered, his voice barely audible. "The law, the traditions, mean nothing if we're dead," one hissed back. "You saw what he did to Councillor Maris when she suggested waiting longer. Found her throat torn out," Wolves blamed. "We can't." A raven landed on the courtyard wall, unusually large, its eyes too intelligent. It cawed once, sharp and deliberate, then flew toward the dark wood. The three men exchanged glances heavy with desperate hope. In the forest, Aldrich caught the raven as it landed, listened to its message carried on something older than language. His expression went hard. "Spring equinox," he told Hilda, who was practicing combat forms he'd taught her, her movements now fluid and deadly. 6 weeks. He's rushing it." Hilda lowered her practice staff, sweat gleaming on her skin despite the lingering cold. "Then we have 6 weeks to prepare." She had changed in the months since her near death, harder, sharper. Her softness burned away to reveal steel underneath. "The banished council members?" "Already moving into position." Aldrich pulled out maps marked with careful notations. "They'll arrive separately, quietly, positioning themselves among the crowd. When we make our entrance, they'll be ready to testify, to produce the original laws, to challenge Magnus's legitimacy." "And my family?" Hilda's voice caught slightly. "They think I'm dead." Aldrich's hand found hers, squeezed gently. "We'll send word the night before, through channels Magnus can't intercept. They'll know you're alive, know to be ready." His other hand lifted her chin. "Are you certain about this? Once we walk through those doors, there's no going back." Hilda's smile was all wolf, all vengeance, all righteous fury. "He threw me off a cliff, Let me return the favor." In the palace, Celeste stood before Hilda's mirror, trying on the Luna's crown, imagining the ceremony where she would finally, officially, become what she'd always believed she deserved to be. She didn't notice the shadow watching from the window, didn't hear the whisper of wings as a raven carried her image back to the woman she thought dead. Spring approached with the inevitability of judgment, and in the dark wood, two souls bound by fate and fury sharpened their claws for the reckoning to come. Spring arrived with deceptive gentleness, warm breezes carrying the scent of new blooms through the palace's open windows. In the great hall, Magnus had spared no expense. Thousands of candles cast golden light across silk banners, tables groaned beneath elaborate feasts, and musicians played melodies meant to celebrate unity and new beginnings. The pack assembled in uneasy splendor. Hilda's family sat in positions of honor, her mother's face a mask of brittle composure, her father's eyes hollow with grief barely contained. Around them, pack members shifted restlessly, their formal attire unable to disguise the tension threading through the crowd like poison. At the front, Magnus stood resplendent in ceremonial robes, the crown of their territory glinting on his dark hair. Beside him, Celeste wore white, a mockery of innocence, her smile triumphant as she gazed at the assembled witnesses to her victory. The high priest raised his hands, ancient words falling from his lips like stones. "We gather to witness the sacred bond, to recognize a new Luna." The doors exploded inward with a crack like thunder. Hilda walked through the splintered wood, and the hall fell into shocked silence so complete that her footsteps echoed like judgment itself. She wore deep crimson, the color of blood and righteous fury, her hair unbound and wild. The scars on her throat gleamed silver in the candlelight, evidence that wouldn't let them look away. Behind her, Aldrich moved with predatory grace, his presence filling the space with power that made every wolf's instinct scream submission. 3 elderly council members flanked them, faces grim and determined. "Hello, husband." Hilda's voice carried to every corner, steady and cold as winter. "Surprised to see your dead wife?" Celeste's face drained of color. Magnus stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, his carefully constructed world cracking apart in real time. "Seize them!" Magnus finally roared, his voice breaking with panic. "Guards, now!" 6 guards charged forward, weapons drawn, prepared to cut down the interruption to their king's perfect ceremony. Aldrich stepped in front of Hilda, his shift explosive and instantaneous. The wolf that emerged made the hall gasp collectively. Silver-white fur caught the candlelight like starfire. Massive shoulders stood level with a man's chest, and eyes burned with ancient authority that every wolf recognized in their blood. This was no ordinary alpha. This was power from the time before corruption, before politics, before everything went wrong. The first guard to reach him died before he could scream, Aldrich's jaws crushing his throat with surgical precision. The second managed a strike that should have connected, but the massive wolf moved like smoke, like death itself, and his claws opened the guard's chest in one devastating swipe. The remaining guards stumbled back, their weapons clattering to the floor, their faces pale with primal terror. Around the hall, pack members pressed against walls, unable to look away from the ancient predator standing between them and the truth they'd been forced to deny. Gregor tried to run. Aldrich's massive form blurred across the space, caught the old conspirator in jaws that could have killed, but held with perfect control, dragged him back to the center of the hall like a misbehaving pup. He dropped him at Hilda's feet, where Gregor lay whimpering, the architect of 7 years of lies reduced to nothing. Aldrich shifted back to human form, utterly unbothered by his nakedness, his body marked with scars that spoke of survival and righteous purpose. One of the elderly council members draped him in a cloak, while another produced documents sealed with wax that predated Magnus's reign. Hilda stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across her former pack. When she found her mother's face in the crowd, shocked, disbelieving, flooding with desperate hope, something in her chest cracked. "I am Luna Hilda," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of everything she'd survived. "6 months ago, I discovered my husband in the forest with his lover." She pointed at Celeste, who had begun backing toward a side door. "That woman, when I confronted them, she attacked me, tore my throat open, shredded my shoulder, nearly took my eye." Gasps rippled through the assembly. Hilda's father stood, his hands clenched at his sides, his face contorting with rage. "And Magnus—" Hilda turned her gaze to her husband, saw him trying to compose his features into denial, into outrage. "My husband, the man who swore sacred vows before this very pack, helped her dispose of what they believed was my corpse. They threw me off the waterfall at the boundary, left me for dead in the river." "Lies!" Magnus found his voice, though it trembled. "Lies from a woman clearly unbalanced who— Do you deny you reported her kidnapped?" Aldrich's voice cut through the protest like a blade. "That you launched false searches while bringing your lover to live in the palace? That you planned this ceremony to install her as Luna before the required mourning period ended?" Magnus's jaw worked soundlessly. In the crowd, Lord Brennan stood, his old bones straightening with renewed purpose. "I witnessed you, Your Majesty," Brennan said, his voice carrying decades of suppressed truth. "Saw you with her, saw the hastiness of your actions, suspected but couldn't prove. Until now." The elderly council members stepped forward, unrolling their documents. "The true laws," one announced, stating that adultery negates mate bonds, that murder attempts by an alpha against their Luna forfeit all claim to rule, that the ancient bloodlines hold rightful authority. Hilda's mother broke free from her seat, stumbling toward her daughter with tears streaming. "Hilda, God's Hilda." The reunion would have to wait, because Magnus, cornered and desperate, made the worst choice possible. His shift was clumsy with panic, his brown wolf lunging not at Aldrich but at Hilda's exposed throat, going for the kill that should have succeeded months ago. He never reached her. Aldrich's massive form intercepted mid-leap, and the two wolves collided with force that shook the floor. The fight lasted seconds. Magnus's wolf, desperate and outmatched, snapped uselessly at air, as Aldrich moved with devastating efficiency. One massive paw caught Magnus across the ribs with force that sent him crashing into the ceremonial altar, splintering wood and scattering candles. Before Magnus could recover, Aldrich's jaws closed around his throat, not crushing, not killing, but holding with absolute dominance that forced submission. Magnus shifted back to human form beneath him, gasping, defeated. Aldrich released him with obvious contempt, shifted back himself, and stood over the fallen king, like judgment made flesh. "Bind him," Aldrich commanded, his voice carrying the unmistakable ring of authority. Guards who moments ago would have died for Magnus rushed forward to obey, their instincts recognizing true power when confronted with it. Celeste made it 3 steps toward the side door before Hilda intercepted her, moving with the combat grace Aldrich had taught her. One swift strike to the back of the knees dropped Celeste hard, and Hilda planted her foot on the woman's spine, holding her down with savage satisfaction. "Going somewhere?" Hilda asked softly, dangerously. "We haven't finished our conversation from the forest." The elderly council members moved to the center of the hall, their voices stronger now, freed from years of fearful silence. The eldest, Lady Miriam, who had served Aldrich's father, held up documents with hands that trembled with righteous purpose. 7 years ago, she announced, her voice carrying to every corner. King Aldrich the Just was murdered in his sleep by Gregor and his conspirators. They claimed sudden illness, but 3 of us witnessed the blood, the violence, the truth they tried to hide. She gestured to her companions, who nodded grimly. We tried to expose them. We were banished for our loyalty. The prince, another council member continued, producing scrolls yellowed with age, was declared unfit because his bloodline wolf terrified them. Because he was too powerful to control, too legitimate to overthrow through politics alone. "Show them," Lady Miriam said to Aldrich, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Show them the proof they tried to erase." Aldrich turned, let the cloak fall from his shoulders. Across his back, stretching from shoulder blade to shoulder blade, a mark gleamed silver against his skin, intricate patterns that moved like living things, the ancient symbol of the true royal line. Every wolf born to rule bore it, unmistakable and impossible to forge. The hall erupted. Pack members surged forward, some crying, others shouting recognition, the older generation remembering what they'd been forced to forget. Hilda's father pushed through the crowd, staring at the mark with wonder and dawning understanding. "The true king," he breathed. "Gods above. The true king lives." Aldrich's eyes found Hilda across the chaos, and the bond between them flared visible, golden light that wrapped around them both, undeniable proof of the mate bond's sacred truth. Where Magnus and Hilda's forced union had been hollow, this connection radiated authenticity that even the most skeptical couldn't deny. "Seize Gregor and the corrupted council members," Aldrich commanded, and his voice brooked no argument. Guards moved with renewed purpose, dragging the old conspirator and 3 council members who had supported the coup toward the cells beneath the palace. Gregor snarled threats that died in his throat when Aldrich merely looked at him. "You will face trial," Aldrich said quietly, "for murder, for treason, for 7 years of tyranny." His gaze shifted to Magnus, still bound on the floor, his ceremonial robes torn and bloodied, as will the false king and his accomplice. Hilda released Celeste to waiting guards, then walked to where her mother stood trembling. The reunion, when it came, was fierce and desperate. Her mother's arms crushing her close, her father joining them, their family whole again after months of grief. "We thought," her mother sobbed against her hair, "we thought we'd lost you forever." "You almost did." Hilda pulled back, touched her mother's face gently. "But I found something better than survival. I found purpose. I found truth." She looked at Aldrich, who watched with patient understanding. "I found my true mate." Her father studied Aldrich with the careful assessment of a man who had been deceived before. But the mark on Aldrich's back, the power radiating from him, the genuine bond glowing between him and Hilda, these things couldn't be questioned. "Then we welcome the true king," her father said, bowing deeply, "and celebrate our daughter's return." The ceremony that followed happened swiftly, as if the pack feared delay might shatter this impossible restoration. Lady Miriam and the banished council members performed the ancient rites, speaking words that hadn't been heard in 7 years. Aldrich knelt, accepted the true crown, retrieved from where Gregor had hidden it, and rose as King Aldrich II. Beside him, Hilda knelt, and felt the Luna's crown settle on her head, with weight that felt right this time, earned rather than assigned. "We will restore justice," Aldrich promised the assembled pack, his voice carrying hope like a tangible thing. "We will return to the ancient laws that protected rather than oppressed. We will remember that leadership is service, not tyranny. And we will heal," Hilda added, her hand finding Aldrich's, their fingers intertwining. "Together, as we were always meant to." The pack's roar of approval shook the rafters. In the cells below, Magnus heard it and knew his reign had truly ended. In the hall above, Hilda stood beside her true mate, her scars visible and honored, her strength forged in survival, and looked out at a future finally worth believing in. Spring had arrived, bringing justice with it. The false king had fallen. The true king had risen. And a Luna who had been thrown away like refuse stood radiant and powerful, proving that some things, true bonds, rightful authority, and hard-won redemption, couldn't be drowned, no matter how deep the water or how dark the fall. As celebrations erupted around them, Aldrich pulled Hilda close, pressed his forehead to hers, and whispered words only she could hear. my queen, my mate, my salvation." Hilda smiled, fierce and free. "And you are mine, forever." Outside, the forest sang with approval, and the ancient magic recognized what mortals sometimes forgot. That true power came not from cruelty or conquest, but from love that survived the impossible, from justice that refused to die, and from two souls who found each other in the darkest places and chose to rise together toward the light.